Now, the Gold Glove Award voting can sometimes be just an absolute sham, but with Ryan Mountcastle and Colton Cowser being named finalists this year, did they actually get it right in 2024? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, October 17th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at the two Orioles in Colton Cowser and Ryan Mountcastle, who are named Gold Glove finalists back on Tuesday. Talk about what they did this year to improve their defense, make it stand out, what their chances are of each winning one of those awards, then talk about, hey, did any Orioles get snubbed from these Gold Glove finalist selections? But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's at Prize Picks. Run your game. So the Gold Glove finalists came out on Tuesday, and the Orioles had two guys on those finalist lists. The way they do them is they take all of the positions in both the American League and the National League that get Gold Gloves, and MLB announces the top three, aka the finalists at each position. Before then, the final round is sent out to the public a week or so from now. I think they do like a whole unveiling show, whatever it may be, to give out the Gold Glove Awards to every position in both the American and National League. And that includes a utility Gold Glove position that they have now as well, which I think is a pretty cool thing to add because a lot more guys are sometimes playing a lot more positions. But we're going to talk about the two Orioles who did get in those finalist lists. Before we do that, though, just want to remind you, please like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We are creeping up on 8,000 subscribers here at the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Once we get to 8,000, we're going to do a very, very cool giveaway here on the show, but you have to be subscribed to be entered. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, help get the number to 8,000, then you can be entered in that giveaway. And of course, for everyone who listens on Apple or Spotify, or wherever it may be, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. It definitely helps out the podcast a lot, especially here in the off season. Unfortunately, it's October and the Orioles are still not playing baseball at this moment, but plenty to talk about here on this show. And we hope you still enjoy our off season content here at Locked On Orioles. And that continues here with some Gold Glove finalists. Colton Cowser in left field in the American League and Ryan Mountcastle at first base in the American League are the Orioles' two finalists. Let's start with Colton Cowser. Already last week on the show, I broke down and did a season recap of his entire 2024 campaign, Cowser's first full season in the big leagues, broke down what went right with his hot start, his hitting the ball hard, what went wrong. He was prone to some slumps. He wasn't good in the big moments. But we also talked about one of the big things that went right, besides the fact that he put together a campaign that could win him American League Rookie of the Year. He also put together a campaign that could win him a Gold Glove. I discussed on that episode last week. Make sure to go back and check it out, how good he was in the field this season. And Cowser was rewarded with at least being a finalist in left field in the American League, along with Stephen Kwan, who has won each of the last two American League left field Gold Gloves, he of the Cleveland Guardians, and Alex Verdugo of the New York Yankees, two guys who are still playing currently in the ALCS. So I'm just going to kind of go through the numbers that we have in the eye test as well and talk about, what the chances are for each of these guys. And I will start it with kind of the big disclaimer, something I've talked about on this podcast before. If there is one kind of group of advanced metrics that I'm still not 100% sold on, I think a lot of people, even those who are very data-driven, fall into this similar category. It's that we're still not quite sure how trustworthy these defensive metrics really are, because it's really the hardest thing to measure, because you catch the ball or not is not as simple as getting a hit or not, or even hitting the ball hard or not, or whatever it may be. It's a lot harder to pull together precise defensive numbers to tell you who the good defenders are and who they aren't. And I like to talk about, I want at least 2 and sometimes 3 full years in the big leagues of that data before I decide, is a guy a good defender or not? Sometimes guys go through swoons and dips and peaks and year to year, whether they're good defenders or not. It's kind of odd to look at these defensive metrics sometimes, but this is the best we've got, because for Gold Glove, you don't really have a lot of stats to look at. If you're looking at fielding percentage, you're kind of behind the times. Remember, fielding percentage only counts errors. It doesn't take into account balls you just can't get to. If you're a right fielder and a lazy fly ball is hit into shallow right field near the line, and you're just too slow to get to it, and you got a terrible jump, and it falls in, that's a base hit. It doesn't go as an error. But when you watch the play, you think a better, more athletic right fielder would have gotten there and had a chance and probably caught that ball. Nothing like that is measured in fielding percentage. Just not a way to go off of how good a player or even really how good a team is in terms of defense. So these numbers are at least better than that, but they're still not perfect, but it's what we have to go off of. Now let's start with StatCast fielding run value. I think right now in kind of the advanced analytics community is the top public stat we have, it feels like at the moment, for grading out defenders. And fielding run value is very similar to StatCast outs above average, which basically looks at, okay, how likely are you to make this play versus did you make this play? That's in terms of where the ball is hit, how hard it's hit. Is it a ground ball? Is it a line drive? Is it a fly ball? What the ballpark is, where you were positioned when the ball was hit. All that stuff comes together, but it averages out everything and puts in everything so that you can compare a catcher to a right fielder in terms of defensive value. And right now, this is the best we've got. In StatCast fielding run value, Cowser is first in Major League Baseball and in the American League among left fielders who played at least 750 innings in left field this year. That is a metric of 10. His number is 10 of his fielding run value. Steven Kwan is second in the American League at 6, and Alex Verdugo, the other finalist, is 5th at 3. Now for StatCast outs above average, which is pretty similar to fielding run value, and especially when you're talking about outfielders, you can really just use outs above average because fielding run value is more of a stat that allows you to compare infielders to outfielders and compare catchers to outfielders and things like that. But we're just comparing left fielders to other left fielders in this scenario. So let's go to outs above average via StatCast. Again, calculated based on that catch probability with a whole bunch of factors baked into it. Colton Cowser is second among qualified players with 8 outs above average in left field. It's not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but you can basically say that Colton Cowser turned 8 more balls into outs in left field than the average left fielder would have. And that was the second most in baseball, only behind Dalton Varsho of the Blue Jays, who had 10 outs above average. But Varsho basically split his time between left field and center field in Toronto this year. And he actually was named a Gold Glove finalist, but as a center fielder. And this came up a little bit as well in that Jarren Duran for the Red Sox, he played more center field than left field, but still played a good chunk of left field and had some high numbers there. Also named a finalist as a center fielder. So Varsho not in this conversation. So among quote unquote left fielders in the Gold Glove race, Cowser is number 1 with 8 outs above average. Again, Steven Kwan is third with 4. Alex Verdugo at 0 outs above average is 11th. They basically rated him out as an average defender when it comes to getting the balls that other guys would not. Now, outs above average goes a little bit deeper. It splits it up between how you are going to your left, going to your right, coming in on balls, going back on balls. And it had Cowser as the best left fielder in Major League Baseball, going back on balls over his head and going to balls to his right. So basically balls closer towards the left field line. He's more average when it comes to moving left and moving in, but is still a good fielder all around. Now, when it comes to the arm strength, Colton Cowser is 96th percentile in arm strength. He's got one of the strongest, most powerful arms of any left fielder, of any defensive player. But his arm accuracy is not always the best. And sometimes you'll see Cowser load up on a throw from left field and have all the power in the world and just kind of sail that thing to no man's land. His arm, when you compare him to the other 2 finalists in Steven Kwan and Alex Verdugo, does not grade out nearly as well. Verdugo and Kwan both have strong arms, but both have much more accurate arms. That's really the reason why Verdugo's anywhere here, is that he's got a really, really good arm and still plays an overall solid left field. You can also bring in defensive runs saved, which is another separate defensive stat. It is not done by StatCast. And I think most people have kind of moved towards StatCast versus the defensive run saved statistic, but it's still something in there that has a little more historic pre-StatCast value, which allows you a little bit more to look back on players and their defensive run save. So it's valuable in that sense. When you're comparing players in 2024, not as valuable, but in terms of defensive run save for left fielders who played at least 750 innings there this year, Colton Cowser is fourth with 4 defensive runs saved in the American League. Steven Kwan second with 9. Alex Verdugo third with 7. Wyatt Langford's got to feel snubbed here of the Texas Rangers. He led all AL left fielders with 12 defensive runs saved, but the other stats didn't like him as much, and he was not a finalist. But again, as I mentioned, all these metrics still need some tweaking, still need to be better, but it's what we've got at this point. Now, watching these guys play, maybe I'm a little biased about Verdugo. Maybe I'm a little biased watching Verdugo try to play that ball in left field on the Cedric Mullins walk-off against the Yankees the final day before the All-Star break. I know you remember that game. But I don't feel like Verdugo has a chance here. Even with the Yankee bump, he's the guy who's kind of gotten all the hatred of the Yankees fans this year. No, it's a new guy every year. It's Joey Gallo. It's Aaron Hicks. It's, the list goes on and on. It was Alex Verdugo this year. I don't feel like he has a chance. I feel like this is Cowser versus Kwan. And Kwan, with the eye test, is an awesome left fielder. We saw that unbelievable catch he made in the ALDS in Detroit to somehow scoop that ball off the ground to save a run. Cowser also, by the eye test, a really, really good defensive left fielder. Here is where I kind of see it. Again, it's down to Kwan and Cowser. Colton Cowser, in terms of the numbers, the outs above average, all that good stuff, was just better. Just better than Steven Kwan in left field this year. But Steven Kwan has won the award every year he's been in the big leagues. He's a 2-time defending Gold Glove left fielder in the American League, and he has continued to be great defensively out there, which could mean that voters, where it's really hard to watch all these guys every single day and get all the defensive nuances, might just go, okay, Kwan's numbers look good. He's won it the past 2 years. He's probably good enough to win again. And I worry that's where the voting would have went, and Cowser will finish second. But what I'll tell you is, if you're looking at just the data, I think Colton Cowser deserves not only the AL Rookie of the Year, but the American League Gold Glove in left field as well. But next up, let's talk about Ryan Mountcastle, maybe a less heralded Gold Glove finalist, and maybe not as much of a slam dunk to try and win this award, but we'll at least talk about how cool it is that he was even nominated as a finalist. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. What's Prize Picks? Well, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less. That's right, more or less. Just one decision on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. You need as little as just 4 correct picks to get up to 100 times your money with these selections. And it can be a football Sunday, a football Saturday, basketball, hockey, baseball. It's all going on in October, and they've got it all at Prize Picks. And it takes like a minute, maybe, to put together all your selections, then sit back and watch that cash roll in. So how do you play? Well, you download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is at Prize Picks. Run your game. So Colton Cowser is a Gold Glove finalist in left field, and I think, for my money, he should be the winner. And the other Orioles Gold Glove finalist is Ryan Mountcastle at first base in the American League, along with Nathaniel Lowe of the Texas Rangers and Carlos Santana of the Minnesota Twins. Now, the Mountcastle case is a little bit more complicated. Let's start with that StatCast fielding runs value. Remember, a way to compare kind of everybody across the board, and it's kind of the go-to fielding stat right now. Ryan Mountcastle, third in the American League at 2. Carlos Santana is first at 11. Nathaniel Lowe is second at 5. Here's where that StatCast outs above average, kind of the best tool right now to compare players to other players at their same position, which is what you're doing when you're giving out Gold Glove awards. Ryan Mountcastle's season was awesome. But when you look at the numbers, and they're a little harder to determine, especially for first basemen, because they do a lot, but they also don't do as much at the same time in terms of moving around and getting to balls. Here's outs above average in the American League at first base. Ryan Mountcastle, 4th with 2. Nathaniel Lowe, 2nd with 7. Carlos Santana, 1st with 14 outs above average at first base. Not only was he the best defensive first baseman in baseball this year, by outs above average and fielding run value, Santana was one of the best defensive players in baseball this year, full stop, regardless of position. And that is where it gets a little tough for Ryan Mountcastle to try and win this award. In defensive runs saved, I talked about maybe a little lesser of a statistic right now. Santana and Mountcastle, this is where it looks good for Ryan. Ryan Mountcastle with 8 defensive runs saved leads baseball in a tie with, unfortunately, Carlos Santana also with 1. Santana also with 8. Nathaniel Lowe just with 1 defensive run save. That was 5th among AL first basemen this year. Similarly to the Cowser, Kwan, and Verdugo, where I think it was really a 2-horse race between Kwan and Cowser. I, with my personal bias, think it's a 2-horse race between Santana and Mountcastle, but Lowe's in it at first base more than Verdugo is in it in left field. But I'll tell you right now, Carlos Santana is winning this award. They honestly did a great job picking these 3 finalists. It's Carlos Santana's to win. This would be his first Gold Glove. It's his 15th MLB season. He's had a couple of seasons in there where he probably should have won the Gold Glove at first base, and he did not. But 14 outs above average, the way he's played, he'll probably come back next year, but it could be his last MLB season. I'm very sure they are giving this Gold Glove award to Carlos Santana, and it's an awesome moment to win his first Gold Glove in his 15th season, but also he's earned it the way he played first base, and he hit well. Not that this should matter, but sometimes it does with Gold Gloves. He hit well too. Just a really, really, really great season over there at first base for Santana, but that does not take away what Ryan Mountcastle did at first base this year. A guy who was drafted as a shortstop, didn't stick at that position, moved him to third, didn't stick there. They tried to move him to left field in the big leagues. That didn't work. Finally, he settled at first base. And it was a little tricky at first. And then he became a passable first baseman. And then you could tell, just via the eye test throughout this season, over at first for Mountcastle, that he became a really, really good first baseman, whether it was fielding grounders, throwing to second, making flips to first, covering the bag, the footwork, all of it. And I think it especially came true when, Mountcastle was out for about a month, April to September, and you saw Ryan O'Hearn pretty much every day defensively at first base. And usually when O'Hearn and Mountcastle were in the same lineup, it was O'Hearn DHing and Mountcastle at first base. That's what we would usually see throughout this year. And when O'Hearn was in there every single day, pretty much, you really started to notice, O'Hearn's fine, but how much better Ryan Mountcastle is defensively over at first base. I think you kind of take it for granted, a good defensive first baseman. The Orioles have had him for a little while now. Like Mark Reynolds and Chris Davis back-to-back were honestly pretty fantastic defensively over at first base. And it's just awesome. I mean, kudos to Ryan Mountcastle for the work he has put in defensively at first base to be a finalist for this award. This is a guy who seemed like a complete defensive liability. They couldn't find a position, but he didn't become a guy where you just stick him at first base and hope for the best. You stick him at first base and he learns the position, and now he has a chance to win a Gold Glove award over there. That is an awesome story. Just incredible stuff for Ryan Mountcastle. I know it's not the hardest position on the diamond, unless you ask, the movie version of Ron Washington, but still very, very cool to see him just be a finalist. And again, as I mentioned, this is Carlos Santana's award this year, but hopefully Mountcastle finishes second, and just what a cool piece. Even though he's not going to get the hardware, just to be named a finalist is awesome. Credit to him for mastering another new position and really figuring this one out to be a go-to defensive first baseman for the Orioles. He's so athletic. You figured at some point he was going to find a position that worked for him. It took a while, but they found first base, and it's just kudos to Ryan Mountcastle for this season. He probably won't get the Gold Glove, but absolutely earned and deserves this finalist selection at first base in the American League. So those are the 2 finalists, Colton Cowser and Ryan Mountcastle. The question is, though, there's a lot of other positions. The Orioles had a lot of other players. Was anyone snubbed from being a Gold Glove finalist? We'll talk about that to finish off the episode coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by HIMSHims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. But through HIMSHims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. HIMSHims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. And the process is 100% online, so there's no need for those uncomfortable doctor's visits. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMSHims can help you find the ED option that works for you. So start your free online visit today at HIMSHims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Again, that is HIMS.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. So to cap things off today, Colton Cowser, Ryan Mountcastle, both Gold Glove finalists. I think at least one of them, and Cowser deserves to win the award this year. But were there any snubs, right? And I think the first name Orioles fans immediately go to is, how is Cedric Mullins not a Gold Glove finalist? And I get it. It is amazing to watch him play center field defensively for the Orioles. He is entering his final year before he becomes a free agent this year. I would love to see the O's extend him for at least another year or two to just get Cedric Mullins on this team, making the plays he does in center field. We know in Baltimore how good he is. He still has not won a Gold Glove. He was a finalist back in 2022, but that's the only time he's been a finalist. He still has not have that piece of hardware, despite the fact that he's been one of the best defensive center fielders in baseball, at least in the American League, basically since the Orioles kind of fully gave him the job in 2021 and he had that 30-30 season. But the other thing is, outs above average, 3, fielding run value is 3. That's middle of the pack, 9th among American League center fielders. So basically middle of the pack with 15 teams. He's good, but what hurts him is he doesn't have the arm. It's a below average arm. That definitely hurts him. These other guys have cannons. And he just the data just doesn't love him as much. And he gets the balls and he plays an amazing center field. The data just did not love him. You look at Cedric Mullins, 3 outs above average in center field. Feels like more than that, but 3 outs above average. Jose Siri's at 16 of the Rays. Jake Myers of the Astros at 14. These guys are putting up guard. Now, these guys are amazing defensive center fielders as well. Siri is, I think, the best one in baseball, either him or Kevin Kiermaier right now. But they get 16s and 14s and Mullins has a 3. That's one of the other reasons why it's do you fully trust the defensive metrics yet? Because you watch the eye test, Jake Myers, great defensive center fielder. Jose Siri, great defensive center fielder. But Cedric Mullins, I would say, also great defensive center fielder, and yet his numbers look completely different than those two guys do. So, I mean, you give kudos to those guys and how well they play center field. The finalists, though, it didn't even include Jose Siri, which is kind of crazy. Dalton Varsho, Jarren Duran, and Jake Myers were the 3 finalists in center field in the American League, all very deserving candidates, but Jose Siri should probably be out there as well. That guy plays a hell of a center field. I think one that's a little odd. Yeah, it stinks that Cedric Mullins is not going to be a finalist. It's a shame that he may never win one, right? Because his playing time could kind of start to go down in the next couple of years. And then it's really tough to win a Gold Glove at that point. And the arm being below average definitely hurts Mullins as well. And there was a part this year where he wasn't a full-time player, especially in the first half. That hurts him too. Adley and Gunnar both kind of rated out as league average defensive players, made some great plays, especially Gunnar, but kind of not Gold Glove material right now. That's totally okay. The one that just kind of bugged me, and this didn't even have anything to do with the Orioles, Anthony Santander, listen, he makes the exact amount of steps he needs to get the balls in right field. He doesn't exert an ounce of energy more than he needs to track down a fly ball that he can get to in right field. Even though he was a finalist back in 2020 for the Gold Glove, I'm not asking Anthony Santander to be a finalist for the Gold Glove in the American League. But the fact that Juan Soto is a finalist for the American League Gold Glove in right field is laughable. Juan Soto is one of the greatest hitters in baseball. He might be the best, but that dude is terrible in right field. Like, line drive, just go by him, over his head, off the wall, can't get to it correctly. Juan Soto is an amazing baseball player, but he stinks in the outfield. This is just one of those, it's a little bit of Yankee bias, but there's a lot of like, oh, this guy's a superstar. Let's just put him on the Gold Glove list. He has some outfield assists. That's because he has a strong arm. And he only has outfield assists because he gets them on plays where he should have caught the ball probably in the first place. Then he has to scramble, and he has a really strong arm and makes a good throw and gets an assist. Juan Soto is not good in right field. And that's where I kind of come around totally on the Gold Gloves. Like, it's good stuff to talk about. I want Orioles players like Cowser and Mountcastle to be recognized, to win these awards, to get rewarded for having what really were good, honestly, great defensive seasons for both Colton Cowser and Ryan Mountcastle this year. But these awards still are some about how good the player is offensively and how well known he is. And it doesn't really dig down and usually get the best three fielders at every position to be the finalist. The Gold Glove Awards are kind of a sham, and I generally don't get super worked up about how they are voted, but it is truly funny because, 2 years ago, Ramon Arias wins a Gold Glove. And I'm sure plenty of people were like, what in the world? But look at the season he had. He deserved it. And I was like, I can't believe they gave a guy in Ramon Arias a finalist, let alone gave him the award. And then they do things like this and give Juan Soto a finalist position. It's just funny the way these things are doled out. But that is the Gold Glove Awards. And we shall see in the near future whether or not Cowser or Mountcastle can win one of those awards as well. That will do it for today's episode. We've got one more episode coming up this week. It is a Friday pod. We'll see if we get any Orioles news and notes between now and then. Maybe we'll get to them on Friday. If not, we will continue our Orioles player season review series from the 2024 season. Every player on the 40-man roster who is not going to get DFA'd immediately when the offseason starts, like a guy like Daniel Johnson, is going to get his own episode recapping his season. We've already done Colton Cowser, Jordan Westberg, and Ramon Arias. Those were last week on the pod. Make sure to go back and check those out. But those will continue, it looks like, on Friday's pod to finish out the week. But until then, I am Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.